Working as a night watchman was never exactly exciting, but I liked the quiet routine. The commercial building where I worked for security was small, with few offices and an empty reception at night. Most of the time, I just monitored the cameras and made occasional rounds to make sure everything was in order. That particular night, it rained heavily, and the sound of water hitting the windows made the atmosphere even quieter. Around 2 in the morning, when I was already used to the monotony, a high-pitched noise startled me. The security panel indicated an open door on the ground floor. It was strange, because I was sure that everything was locked in the last round. I took my flashlight and followed the dimly lit corridor to the main entrance. When I got there, the door was slightly ajar, swinging with the wind. I felt a chill going up down the spine. I looked around, but there was no one. Maybe it was just a system failure, I thought. I closed the door and checked the locks before returning to my room. As soon as I sat down, a thud echoed through the corridor, as if something heavy had fallen. My heart raced. I took the radio to call for reinforcements, but I hesitated. Part of me wanted to believe that it was just a common noise from the building, but something in the way the sound reverberated made me doubt it. I got up again, now with more caution. I took my flashlight and went in the direction of the noise, trying not to let my mind play tricks on me. The corridor was dark, except for the weak lighting of the emergency lights. As I advanced, I noticed something that made me stop immediately: mud marks on the floor. They came from the front door, which I had just closed, and went inside the building. The problem is that, as much as I knew, no one had entered. My instinct told me to get out of there and call the police, but I needed to make sure I wasn't just an ordinary invader. I followed the footprints, which led to the hall of one of the empty offices. The silence was overwhelming, and the only thing I could hear was the muffled sound of the rain outside. I carefully pushed the office door and lit up the interior with the flashlight. The room was completely empty, with no signs of burglary or anything out of place. I looked around, confused. The mud marks ended there, but there was no one. That's when I felt something. It wasn't a noise, nor a visible presence. It was just a weight in the air, as if something was there watching me. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to understand what was happening. My heart pounded in my chest, and the flashlight trembled slightly in my hand. I forced my breath to calm down and retreated slowly, returning to the corridor. If someone was in there, they couldn't have just disappeared. But when I looked again at the mud marks on the floor, a detail shivered me from head to toe. The footprints seemed to start at the door, but there was no mark coming back. Whoever it was entered but never left. I decided it was enough. I went to my security room, locked the door, and checked the cameras. My stomach turned when I turned the tape back to the moment when the front door opened by itself. The image was a little grainy, but something caught my attention. For a brief moment, a shadow seemed to move through the corridor before disappearing completely. But it wasn't someone normal. The shape was tall and indistinct, as if it had no defined contours. I blinked a few times, trying to make sure my eyes weren't deceiving me. My whole body said I wasn't alone in that building. I felt a chill down my spine and a strange weight in the air, as if something invisible was there watching me. I continued watching the recording, advancing a few minutes, and that's when I realized another bizarre thing. At a certain moment, the reception camera captured a reflection in the glass of the entrance door. It was a dark silhouette, but without any facial details, just a shape standing there, as if staring at me. The problem? I never saw anyone outside when I went to investigate. If it were a person, I would have seen it. If it were a mistake in the camera, the silhouette would not be moving slightly, as if breathing. I moved away from the screen and looked around, feeling a chill rise to the back of my neck. The rain outside was stronger now, and the thunder made the walls of the building vibrate slightly. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? That a shadow appeared in the reflection of a camera? They were going to laugh at me or, at most, send a car that would take a quick look and leave. I decided that I just needed to finish the shift, keep the living room door locked, and not leave until dawn. But just when I thought about it, a heavy noise echoed from the corridor, as if something had fallen or been dragged. I closed my eyes for a second, gathering courage. I knew I couldn't ignore that. I took a deep breath and took my flashlight before opening the door to the monitoring room. The corridor was immersed in a heavy silence, interrupted only by the sound of the rain hitting the windows. I walked slowly, trying to keep my breathing under control. The noise had come from the reception, and as I approached, I saw that one of the waiting benches was overturned on the floor. My stomach turned. I would have heard if someone had come in. In addition, the front door was locked since I came back. But what really made me freeze was realizing that there were mud marks around the fallen bench, marks that weren't there before. I quickly looked at the entrance door, and my heart almost stopped. She was ajar. I was absolutely sure that I had locked it after the last round. I swallowed hard and approached slowly, feeling every muscle of my body tense. I went outside, the rain soaking my shirt almost immediately, and I looked around. The streets were empty. The parking lot too. But when I looked at the sidewalk, I noticed something even worse. Mud footprints leading away from the building, but no sign of where they had started. It was as if someone or something had simply appeared out of nowhere, entered the building and then left. I went back inside the building, locking the door quickly. My heart pounded in my chest as I headed back to the monitoring room. I sat on the chair, took a deep breath, and rewinded the images from the external cameras. My stomach turned when I saw the recording. At a certain moment, the entrance camera captured a movement on the sidewalk, but there was no one there. The front door simply began to open by itself, slowly, as if someone invisible was pushing it. The bank fell soon after, with no one around. My chest got heavy. That didn't make sense. I stopped recording and looked at the screen in real time. Nothing. The building was empty. But the feeling of being watched was still there, stuck to me like a weight in the air. I asked to change shifts the following week. I never wanted to work at night in that building again. To this day, I can't explain what happened on that rainy night. All I know is that something opened that door, and whatever it is, I never want to be there to see it again. I've been working as an app delivery man for a few months, usually on the night shift, because the pay is better. I've had some strange deliveries, but nothing that made me really uncomfortable. Until that night. The order appeared on my cell phone like any other, but the address caught my attention. It was far away, almost outside the city, in an area that I knew had few houses and many of them were empty or in ruins. The restaurant where I took the order also seemed confused about the delivery, since the address did not appear often. But I accepted. It was just another request. The road to there was poorly lit, and when I finally arrived, I was sure that that house must not have had a resident for a long time. The paint was peeling, the windows had broken boards, and the garden was just tall brogs. But the balcony light was on. When I knocked on the door, a lady answered. She looked old, but her expression was kind. The only strange thing was the absolute silence inside the house. No TV, no radio, nothing. She smiled and said, "You can take it to the upstairs room, dear. The food is for my guest." It was not common to ask me to go up and deliver the food inside the house, but the lady seemed harmless, so I didn't question it. What really bothered me was the state of the countryside. The air was heavy, humid, and a strange smell hovered in the environment, something between mold and rotten wood. The furniture was covered in dust, and some had sheets thrown on top, as if the house had been closed for years. I went up the stairs slowly, the floor creaking under my feet, and I wondered how someone could live there. When I reached the top, I saw the bedroom door ajar. I took a quick look before entering, and that's when I noticed the pictures. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, covering all the walls of the room. Old photos, those in black and white, with people I didn't recognize. Some faces stared at me directly, others seemed to look away. Most of the photos were dusty, but some looked cleaner, as if someone had touched them recently. I didn't know what to do. I put the delivery package on a nearby table, and turned to leave as soon as possible. That's when I heard whispers, weak, almost indistinct, coming from inside the room. I was paralyzed for a second, trying to rationalize what I had heard. Maybe it was just the wind passing through some rifts, or the sound of the rain outside. But when I paid more attention, I realized that the whispers looked like words, disconnected phrases that I couldn't fully understand. The heart started beating faster. Slowly, I turned my head into the room again. The lady was still there, sitting on a chair, facing me. But now, she didn't smile anymore. His eyes were fixed on me in a strange way, as if he were analyzing me. She hadn't said anything since I went up, but it was impossible to ignore the feeling that she knew exactly what I was hearing. The atmosphere in that room became unbearable. The air seemed denser, and a chill went up my spine. I needed to get out of there. I forced a kind of awkward smile and said anything about the delivery being made, trying not to show the discomfort. I took a step back, but with every movement I made towards the door, I felt as if I was being watched more closely, as if something, or someone, was there with me beyond that lady. When I finally left the room and started to go downstairs, I heard a last sound coming from upstairs. A weak laugh, almost as if it were inside my own head. I went downstairs as fast as I could without looking desperate. With each step, my body became more tense, hoping that something would call me, touch me, or make some sound that confirmed what I already felt. I was not alone in that house. When I finally got to the ground floor, I saw that the lady was still standing at the top of the stairs, watching me. I didn't say anything, he just looked at me as if he expected something from me. I forced myself to act naturally, thanked her for the tip she hadn't even given me, and went out the door before my mind began to invent even more disturbing things. Outside, the feeling of relief was immediate, but something was still strange. The air seemed heavy, as if the house exhaled something suffocating. When I got on the bike and quickly looked back, I saw that the light upstairs was now off, as if no one had ever been there. I started the engine in a hurry and accelerated without looking back. The way back home was silent, but the feeling that I was still being watched did not leave me. I got home trying to leave everything behind, but the restlessness remained. I took a shower, had dinner, and tried to watch something to distract my mind, but the image of that decadent house and the lady staring at me didn't leave my head. I decided to open the application to check the order history. I looked for the address, but I didn't find anything, as if that request had never existed. I stared at the screen for a few minutes, trying to understand. Did I write down the wrong address? But I had been there delivering the food. That didn't make sense. In the following days, I made several deliveries around the city, trying to forget what happened. But every time I passed through that region, I felt a chill. The house no longer appeared on the maps of the application. I started to avoid the area, but on a rainy night, I had to go there to get to another destination. When I looked to the side where the house should be, I felt a chill in my spine. The land was empty. There was no house, only tall and a broken fence. I stood still for a few seconds, not knowing what to think. I tried to get any sign from the house, but there was nothing. What happened? Was I getting paranoid? The street was deserted, the cutting wind made the rain hit the trees. But what really bothered me was the fact that, no matter how much I tried to remember the details, the house seemed to disappear from my memory, as if it had never existed. At that moment, I felt a weight in my chest, as if something invisible was watching me, waiting for me to leave. The feeling of being watched did not disappear after that day. I went through that neighborhood a few more times, but the house never appeared again, and over time, I began to believe that all that was just my mind, playing tricks on me. However, every time I lay down to sleep, I couldn't avoid the thought that something was wrong. Something in that delivery had been different, but what was it? I would never know. That order disappeared in the app. The house that disappeared overnight. And even more disturbing, the certainty that, no matter how hard I try, that old lady is still there, waiting for me, somewhere in those dark and empty streets. I know that what I'm going to tell you may seem like an exaggeration, but what happened that night still haunts me. Working alone in the laundry was not something new for me. I always closed the place at night when the movement slowed down. That particular night, it was raining a lot. The sound of water hitting the windows was almost relaxing. I was folding sheets and towels, a simple routine, without anything too much. But something seemed different, as if the atmosphere had changed. I was focused on my work when I heard a strange sound, something like the snoring of a machine turning on and off on its own. It looked like the dryer was on again, but when I went to check, everything was normal. No machine out of place. I thought it was just my imagination, but the feeling that something was wrong didn't go away. The problem began to intensify a little later, when I was returning to my corner, where I left the towels dry. Suddenly, in the corner of my field of vision, I saw a dark figure moving quickly between the shelves. I froze, looked at the place, but there was no one there. Fear began to grow in me, but I tried to ignore it. The laundry was a big and kind of old-fashioned place, and the noise of the rain outside might have shook my head. But as the night progressed, the environment seemed to get heavier, and a feeling of discomfort took over me. That's when I decided to ask the owner about what was happening. The next day, I casually asked the owner if strange things had ever happened in the laundry. He hesitated for a moment before answering. After a sigh, he said that, years ago, an employee suffered a work accident there. She took a very strong shock while handling one of the industrial machines and couldn't resist. The case was muffled, and shortly after they did a complete renovation at the place. He commented that, since then, some employees said they felt chills or heard strange noises, but never paid much attention. I tried to laugh to disguise the discomfort, but something inside me said that it explained a lot. That same night, I went back to work, trying to convince myself that everything was just a coincidence. But as soon as I entered the laundry, I felt a strange smell in the air, like burnt wire. I looked around, but there was nothing out of place. My heart started to speed up. I ignored and continued my routine, but the weather was heavy. With each passing minute, the feeling of being observed increased. The worst thing was when, in the middle of the night, one of the machines turned on by itself. It wasn't just a beep or a flashing light. She really started working out of nowhere. My blood frosted. I quickly hung up and took a few steps back, trying to find a logical explanation. That's when I heard a noise coming from the back, as if something had fallen on the floor. I swallowed hard and went to the bottom, moved by a mixed impulse of fear and curiosity. The sound had come from the area where the laundry baskets were, and when turning the corridor, I saw one of them overturned on the floor, with clothes scattered everywhere. My stomach turned. I tried to convince myself that it was just badly stacked, but the truth is that I had been there a few minutes before and nothing was out of place. While I was collecting the clothes, a chill ran down my spine. I felt something, a presence. It was as if someone was standing right behind me. I held my breath and turned around in an impulse, but the corridor was empty. I hurried back to the main area and forced myself to keep folding my clothes, trying to ignore the restlessness that took over me. But the laundry seemed to have gained a life of its own. The lamps flashed slightly, the feeling of being observed intensified, and then, without warning, all the turned-off machines emitted a single beep at the same time, as if someone had run their fingers through each control panel. My knees weakened. That couldn't be a common electrical problem. And it was at that moment that I felt something cold touch my shoulder. I froze at the time. The touch was subtle but real. A chill ran through my body, and I turned around so fast that I almost tripped over the pile of clothes next to me. There was no one there. My eyes went through every corner of the laundry, my heart beating hard in my chest. The only thing that moved was the weak reflection of the flashing lamps on the stainless steel machines. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself that it was just tiredness, my mind playing tricks on me. But then, something worse happened. One of the washing machines started working on its own. The sound of water filling the drum echoed in the silence, and I clearly saw the start button pressed, as if an invisible hand had just turned it on. My instincts screamed for me to get out of there, but my body was paralyzed. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to calm down. But when I opened them again, my gaze went straight to the large mirror on the back wall. And that's where I saw it, a feminine silhouette, standing between the machines, with her back to me. My chest tightened. There was no one else in the laundry. And even so, that figure was there, motionless, as if it was waiting for me to do something. My eyes were glued to the mirror, the air stuck in my throat. The figure didn't move, but I could feel a suffocating presence, as if the air around me had become heavier. My first instinct was to turn around and face directly the place where she should be. But when I did that, nothing. The corridor between the machines was empty. My chest rose and fell quickly, my mind trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was a strange reflection, a projected shadow of something. But when I looked at the mirror again, the figure was still there, and this time facing me. My body reacted before I could think. I took a step back, bumping into the bench, my heart racing. The woman in the reflection had an indistinct face, as if she were covered by a dense fog. But his eyes, two dark and empty holes, were fixed on mine. That's when a loud snap made me jump. The washing machine that had turned on by itself stopped abruptly, the door unlocking with a dry click. The feeling that I was being watched intensified, every cell of my body screaming for me to get out of there. I forced myself to take a deep breath and take a hesitant step forward. The figure was still there, motionless in the reflection of the mirror. My mind insisted that it was impossible, that it was just a game of my imagination, but the cold in my spine said otherwise. The strangest thing was that the mirror didn't just reflect her. Everything around seemed slightly distorted, as if I was looking at a different place, a space that wasn't exactly the one I was in. That's when a sharp noise echoed through the laundry, an electric snap, followed by a low hiss. The burning smell took the air, and by instinct, my eyes went to the control panel of the machines. The lights flashed irregularly, as if there was a short circuit. My stomach turned. The story the owner had told me about the employee who died there, electrocuted, came back to my mind like a punch. I didn't want to believe it, but everything seemed connected. The hissing of the machines increased, and for a moment, I was sure that they would turn on by themselves again. My heart shot when I felt a strange heat around me, as if the air was loaded with electricity. The light blinked once more, and in a reflection, I looked at the mirror again. My blood frosted. The figure was still there, but this time it was closer, much closer. There was no more doubt. That wasn't an illusion. My body reacted before my mind. I took a step back, stumbling lightly on the pile of clothes next to me. The burning smell got even stronger, and a loud pop came from the machine I had fixed earlier, as if something was trying to revive her by force. My vision blurred for a second, and I swear I heard a whisper, weak, almost a moan. It wasn't a word, it was just a presence. The adrenaline made me act. I ran to the circuit breaker and turned off the power at once, leaving the laundry in the dark. For a moment, only the rain and my racing heart filled the oppressive silence. I waited, trying to control my breathing. Nothing happened. When I finally got the courage to turn on my cell phone flashlight and look around, the laundry was empty. No sound, no shadow, no strange reflection. Just an absolute silence. I gathered my things as soon as possible and left without looking back. The next day, I resigned without giving explanations. I couldn't continue there, not after what I saw or what I felt. I still pass in front of the laundry sometimes, and I always avoid looking directly at the glass of the windows. Deep down, I'm afraid of what I can find reflected there.